Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is CJ. This is Out of Bounds DFS, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the PrizePicks NBA board for March 1st. It's the first of the month. Can't believe it, but we've already been on YouTube for over 2 full months. January 1st, we started, had a great first month. February, had a great second month, and now we're here in our third month doing these videos on YouTube. I appreciate all the support and all you subscribers and everybody who's tuning into these videos. It means a lot to me. But if this is your first time to the channel, well, welcome to Out of Bounds DFS, where we talk single player daily fantasy sports. So if you play on PrizePicks, Monkey Knife Fight, any of those other sites, this video is probably pretty relevant to you in helping you hopefully win more money on the NBA slate tonight. So hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet. Turn on notifications. I release videos pretty much daily, so I don't want you missing any of that content. And if you're liking what I'm doing here, hit the like button. It never hurts to help support a creator like myself. So 7 games on tonight's NBA slate. Not a large slate, not a small one. I'd call this a perfect medium. So we got to start things off here by talking injury news. So starting at the top of the injury news board on Roto Grinders here, we've got John Wall, who is questionable. He could be rested on a back-to-back. Malcolm Brogdon is also questionable with right knee soreness. Tobias Harris is questionable with a right knee contusion. Kevin Durant continues to be out with a hamstring injury. Kyrie Irving is questionable with a shoulder. Cody Zeller questionable with a hip. Gordon Hayward questionable with a hand. Joel Embiid questionable with left ankle soreness. Paul Millsap is out with a knee injury. Devontae Graham is doubtful with a knee. Keldon Johnson questionable due to COVID protocol. Derek White out due to COVID protocol. JaMychal Green out. And Jeff Green questionable with a right shoulder contusion. So not too much super impactful or devastating news to talk about. So without further ado, guys, let's just get right into it. We got the very first game on the board featuring a couple of guys whose names end in itch. Luka Doncic, Nikola Vucevic facing off here. We've also got the likes of Kristaps Porzingis, Evan Fournier, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Terrence Ross, the Human Torch himself. So plenty of good names to talk about. So let's start by taking a look at the game totals and spread like we've been doing in our recent videos here. So this game does tip off around 7 p.m. tonight. We've got Orlando at home at 107.25. Dallas, the visiting favorite here at 113.75. So, you know, the Magic, if you haven't been paying attention to the NBA season, haven't been very good. They haven't been able to hang around and stay competitive in a lot of these games. I would know. I'm a Magic fan, and it's been a struggle. The struggle is definitely real. So tonight we're looking at about a 6.5 point spread here. I wouldn't call it green. Probably put it more toward that yellow to orange range, quite honestly. So a little bit of a blowout risk, a little bit of concern here. The totals, I like the Dallas side more points on their side of things than I do Orlando. So I wish there was more total points between both teams, but such is life, such is life. So we'll start things off by sorting by this DVA metric here, and this is defense versus archetype. So they've taken the DVP, defense versus position, and they went ahead and amped it up a little bit. So instead of just a generic center, well, now you've got a versatile big or a post-up big. So they've kind of gotten more specific with how they classify players in the positions. So we'll start things off here at the very top of the board. And, you know, one guy that's going to stand out to me right off the jump here is Luka Doncic. So Doncic is projected at 55 fantasy points over on PrizePicks. He's at 54.6 on Roto Grinders. So pretty close, right? I mean, there's a little bit of a difference there. Roto Grinders preferring to take the under on Luka Doncic. But let's get into his recent game logs and see how he has performed in recent games. So 60.9, that'd be an over. Then you got an under here, and then you got a push right at 55. 30.6 and a 49.7. So Luka hasn't been playing terrific basketball. The under has been the way to go. In his last 5 games, he's went under in 3 out of 5, and he's had 1 push and 1 over. So for you guys keeping track at home, that's a 1 over 1 over, 3 under, and 1 push. So interesting game logs for Luka Doncic. It's been hard to kind of trust him lately. But as we mentioned, this is a good DVA situation for him. The Orlando Magic allowing over 52 fantasy points per game to your no-name combo guard. You're just your run-of-the-mill generic combo guard, 52.05. But then you put in the Doncic factor, and you get a little bit more excited that he's got a chance to possibly break out of his recent slump and potentially go over 55 fantasy points. So this is 2 games and 3 nights for him, playing 35 minutes per game, 1.51 fantasy points per minute, and a usage rating of nearly 36. Fantastic numbers, some of the best fantasy point per minute and usage numbers in the entire league, regardless of what the position is. So liking Luka Doncic, he's the guy that's jumping off the page to me here. The next guy is Nikola Vucevic. I think he's kind of worth mentioning. Dallas, with Maxi Kleber in there, he's a pretty good defender, I would say. But Nikola Vucevic has been playing pretty good basketball himself here. Now, he's projected at 50.5 fantasy points. So they didn't give us a clean 50. They didn't want to round it up to 51. No, they split the difference and made it 50.5. So based on his projections on Roto Grinders, they like the under on Nikola Vucevic here. Let's just see what he's been up to in his recent games. Get a better idea if going under or going over on Vucevic is the right move. There we go. Finally loading up here. All right, so go 5 games back. A big over at 70 points, 63.9, another big over. Then he goes under in his next 2 games here, 41.8, 41.4. Good, but not good enough for an over. So you got 2 overs, 2 unders, and then you got a 54.6, which would be enough for an over on tonight's projection. So he's went over 3 times out of his last 5, under in 2 out of 5. So pretty decent performances lately for Vucevic. Now, the Mavericks, they're giving up 33.32 fantasy points per game to versatile bigs, so this is not a plus DVA situation for Nikola Vucevic. So, the under might be the way to go here. Playing 2 games in 3 nights, almost 34 minutes per game, 1.39 fantasy points per minute, and a usage rating of 28.74. So, some definite blowout risk here. Even more reason for me to lean toward taking the under if this game gets out of hand like a lot of Magic games have been in recent days. Then Nikola Vucevic probably won't be out there running a whole lot of minutes. So let's continue to make our way down the line here and looking at these DVA columns and seeing what else stands out. Evan Fournier, he's projected at 32. They got him at 31.56. DVA is 29.26, so there may be some potential for Fournier or Ross here. Probably liking Terrence Ross's situation a little bit more. Let's talk Ross real quick. He's projected at 27 over on PrizePicks, 28.24 over on Roto Grinders. So shooting wings doing pretty decent here against this Mavericks team. Let's just dig into T. Ross's game logs real quick and see what the Human Torch has been up to. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Terrence Ross and his game, think J.R. Smith. I think he kind of fits that J.R. Smith mold where, streaky shooter, but when the shots start falling, this dude can get hot, and he can get hot in a hurry. Scoring dependent, so if the shot's not falling, it's going to be tough for him to hit the over on any of his fantasy projections. So here you see in his last 5, he went over tonight's projection of 27 with a 37-point performance here. Then he drops down to 24, missing the over on tonight's projection. 42.6, well over there. 15.1 and 22.3 would have put him well under in his last 2 games. So, guys, when he's getting shots up and they're dropping, I'm going to keep reiterating here, that's when Terrence Ross is going to hit the over for you. Now, good news for him is that this Dallas Mavericks team is giving up 29.26 fantasy points per game to players with the shooting wing classification like Terrence Ross. So that's a good thing for him because this 29.26 fantasy points per game average they're allowing is higher than his projection of 27 over on PrizePicks. So I think there's a case to be made here for Terrence Ross going over tonight's projection. He's been playing about 29 minutes per game. His fantasy points per minute, not very good at just 0.89. You'd like to see him go, one or more fantasy points per game, but that's not the case here. And then his usage rating's at 23.47. Now, typically, I like a usage rating of like 25, or more, but hey, he's just not getting it done. He's more of a catch and shoot guy anyways, so not a ton of ball handling going on with Terrence Ross. He's going to be coming off screens. He's going to be getting little handoffs and creating off the dribble and stuff like that. So there you have it for T. Ross. I think I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next game here. We've got the Indiana Pacers versus the Philadelphia 76ers. Much more interesting game in terms of fantasy potential here, and I think we can find some good plays, some good guys to target here. Now, the first one that's jumping out at me is Malcolm Brogdon, who is questionable tonight. We're going to talk about him anyway because in terms of DVA, this is about as good of a plus DVA situation as you could ask for. Now, his projection on RotoGrinders is 35.5, which puts him under by about 1.5 points. So they're leaning toward the under right now, and I'm sure his questionable designation has a little bit to do with that. So we'll dig into his recent game logs and see if Brogdon has been hitting the over on this 37 or if the under's been the way to go on Brogdon. I call him Brogdanovich just because he reminds me of like Bojan Bogdanovic, however you say his name. Anyway, in his last 5 games here, you see 41.2 would put him well over tonight's projection at 37, 49.5, an even bigger game, and he continued to take his game to another level here with 54.3, so 3 games where he just crushed 37. Well, his last 2 haven't been quite so good. 31.1, 27.2 would put him well under 37. So his last 5 games, he's went over 3 times and under 2 times. Now looking back here against this Philadelphia team, he does have a game log back on January 31st where he played over 37 minutes. Now, in that game, he ended up finishing with 42 fantasy points, which would be good enough to put him over this 37 tonight. So always keep that in mind, previous matchups versus these teams. Now, moving ahead here, he's going to be playing about 34 minutes. He is a combo guard, and as I alluded to earlier and mentioned, this Philadelphia 76ers team has not guarded combo guards very well this season. They're allowing almost 54 fantasy points per game. So his projection of 37, that difference between the 54 and the 37, I think there's plenty of ceiling, plenty of upside here for Brogdon. Now, this is 3 games in 4 nights for him, so maybe rest or fatigue, rather, is a factor. Playing almost 36 minutes per game, 1.09 fantasy points per minute, and a usage rating of over 26. So good numbers there for Malcolm Brogdon. All right, anybody else jumping out here? We've got Tobias Harris. He was also on the injury report. Not in a plus DVA matchup here, but his projection's 35 on PrizePicks. He's 35 on RotoGrinders. Not seeing much of an edge to make me get too excited here about Tobias Harris. Joel Embiid projected for 53 on RotoGrinders versus the 51 over on PrizePicks, so that would put him as a favorite to go over. Indiana, pretty tough in terms of front court. You got Miles Turner, Domantas Sabonis, possibly could make things difficult on Joel Embiid, and the fact that he's nursing an injury, well, that's just not good news for Embiid. I just want to take a look at his game log and see how he did against Indiana last time these two teams met. With no Embiid and no Harris, I mean, Ben Simmons is the only healthy guy for this Philadelphia 76ers team. You might want to get that trigger finger ready to click the over on his fantasy score of 41 in case either of these guys are ruled out tonight. But if we go down here to January 31st against Indiana, man, he just so happened to miss that game. So Nothing really to look at there for Embiid, but if we go back and look at his last 5 games, 93.9 monster performance. Nothing else needs to be said there. Then he's got a 52.4, so back-to-back games where he would have went over the 51 projection tonight. 35.4, 48.8 puts him under, and then finally caps it off in his last game with a 72.6. Another fantastic game for Joel Embiid. So in his last 5 games, guys, he's got 3 games of going over, 2 games of going under. So Joel Embiid, dealing with that injury, facing a tough front court. I mean, I'd kind of lean toward the under on him personally, but that's just kind of how I'm looking at things. But moving down the list here, nobody else is really jumping off the page in terms of DVA situations that are positive. So just overall, Philadelphia projected for 114, Indiana 109.5. The spread's not too worrisome. Probably put it in the yellow zone for me in terms of blowout potential or risk. Otherwise, the totals just are okay. They're not fantastic. This isn't projecting to be one of the higher scoring games on the board, but enough of that one. We can move on to the next game, and that's the Denver Nuggets versus the Chicago Bulls. This game tips off at 8:10 p.m. over on PrizePicks, and I believe this was the game that was supposed to happen yesterday but got postponed, if I remember correctly. If I'm wrong about that, just drop a comment below. Let me know what the situation was, why this game was canceled. But let's scroll down here and take a look at some DVA situations that might make a lot of sense. We've got Kobe White, who is projected for 28 over on PrizePicks, 29.35 on RotoGrinders. So Kobe White's standing out to me here. Let's take a look and see how Kobe has been doing and get an idea here if the over the under is the way to go. So if we go back to his 5th game, that was against Philly. 23.7 puts him under by a few points versus tonight's projection. So that's 1 for the under column. 31.6 would put him over. 42 would put him well over on this 28 tonight. 31.6 also puts him over. And then 28. And I think, in his last game he played here against the Phoenix Suns, I think he was projected for 28 in that game too. So if you took Kobe White that night, well, this ended up being a push, which is a very uncommon thing, a very rare occurrence to encounter a push situation in NBA DFS, especially these PrizePicks games. So in his last 5, guys, just to recap, he's went over 3 times, he's had 1 push, and he's had 1 game where he's went under. So playing much better basketball. His minutes are up over 30 in his last few games. So loving what I'm seeing for Kobe White recently. Now, moving ahead here, he's going to be playing about 32 minutes. He's a combo guard, and why Kobe White stood out to me is the fact that the Denver Nuggets have not done a good job defending combo guards this season. In fact, they're allowing over 45 fantasy points per game to combo guards like Kobe White. So to call this a plus DVA situation would be an understatement. This is a very good plus DVA situation for him. So this average of 45.25, well over his projection of 28 tonight on PrizePicks. He should be well rested, playing over 33 minutes per game. 0.87 fantasy points per minute, not very good. And the usage rating, 22.91, almost 23. Not spectacular either, but let's keep going here. Maybe somebody else will jump out at us. A guy who has been playing pretty good basketball is Jamal Murray, and Jamal Murray's in a good spot tonight. He is projected at 39.05 here in this game, so we can take a look at his recent game logs. Now, he would be an over based on his PrizePicks projection, and you could see by his game logs here in recent days that the over makes a lot of sense. So if you go back to his 5th game, 65.2. Heck, if you even go back to his 6th or 7th game, he went over once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times in a row. He's went over 38 fantasy points. Now, his last game against OKC, it ended up being a blowout, so he didn't play that many minutes. 30.8 minutes in that game. Ended up seeing the bench early, and you can't blame Denver for resting him. He's been playing big minutes in a lot of these games here recently, so I'm sure he's looking forward to the All-Star break and getting some much-needed rest. Looking back here, though, I don't see any game logs of him versus the Chicago Bulls, so we could go ahead and move and talk about his minutes, where he's projected to play 36 tonight. Now, Chicago hasn't done a great job against combo guards, and that's why we're talking Jamal Murray right now. They're allowing almost 45 fantasy points per game on average to combo guards. So that number is quite a bit higher than this 38 that he's projected at. So I think that there's some ceiling here, some wiggle room for him to go above 38, especially when you take into consideration the fact that he has just been on a tear in recent games. 2 games and 3 nights for Jamal, 34.2 minutes per game, fantasy points per minute over 1, so pretty decent, and his usage rating is actually just a little bit below 25, so okay, but not great fantasy points per minute numbers and usage rating for Jamal Murray. So continuing to work down the list here, here's another guy that's catching my eye is Michael Porter Jr., who is projected at 31 on PrizePicks, 31.29 on RotoGrinders, but his DVA situation is a positive one. This is a plus matchup. Versatile fours have done pretty well against Chicago Bulls. They're allowing over 36 fantasy points per game to versatile forwards. So let's dig into Michael Porter Jr.'s logs real quick and just see what he's been up to. So we go back to the 5th game, 29.9 puts him under, 19.6 puts him under, 28.5 puts him under. So he's went under in 3 in a row. Then he bounces up here at 34.5, putting him over this 31, and then comes back down to another under here at 30. So in his last 5 games, he's went under 4 times and over just once. Now, with Paul Millsap, JaMychal Green out of the lineup, Michael Porter Jr. should continue to play bigger minutes. Let's talk about those. 32 minutes tonight is his projected number. I already mentioned the DVA being a few points higher than where he's projected today at 31, so that's looking good. 2 games and 3 nights for MPJ, playing 28 minutes a game. Fantasy points per minute are exactly at 1, and his usage rating is kind of low, 18.67. Not going to lie there. So Michael Porter Jr. might be a guy to keep an eye out for. Moving down the list here, Jokic, not in a plus DVA situation, but just thinking about who might be guarding him tonight, Wendell Carter Jr. I mean, you know, it's hard not to like Nikola Jokic. He is just an absolute monster in terms of fantasy production. So moving on down, there's Wendell Carter projected for 28 on PrizePicks, 29.77 on RotoGrinders. So they kind of like the over on RotoGrinders, but if you look at how Denver has done against versatile bigs like Wendell Carter is classified as, well, 22.67 fantasy points per game. They've done a pretty good job of keeping versatile bigs in check, so not something that's really just standing out to me. Zach LaVine, scoring wing, big-time negative situation in terms of DVA for him. Not really feeling that one in terms of taking the over, so that might be a good situation to take the under. They got him at 42.5 on RotoGrinders. He's at 43 on PrizePicks, so RotoGrinders kind of liking the under on Zach LaVine. So yeah, there you have it. The totals are pretty good for this game. 226.5 combined points, not bad whatsoever. Almost hitting that mark of 230 or more that I look for. And the spread is decent too, 4.5 points. But I think this spread is a little deceiving. I think Denver's just a much better team. If they come out clicking, coming off of a little bit of rest that they got recently, I think that this game could be a runaway pretty quickly. So that's going to do it for that one. Let's move on to the next game. We've got the Utah Jazz versus the New Orleans Pelicans. And this game's going to tip off at 8:10 p.m. Also, we've got the likes of Rudy Gobert, Zion Williamson, Donovan, Spida, Mitchell, Brandon Ingram, Mike Conley, Lonzo Ball. So some definite big-time fantasy names to talk about here. So let's go ahead and click these games and start talking game totals and spreads. So New Orleans 114.25. They are 7-point underdogs against this Utah Jazz team. So if I were to give this a color coding, I'd probably call the blowout risk or blowout potential in that yellow to orange range for me. Utah has been playing fantastic basketball, blowing a lot of teams out, and it makes a lot of sense here why they are coming into this one as such a big favorite. So let's start looking at some of these DVAs. There's not a lot that are really jumping out at me, but the one that really stands out the most is Donovan Mitchell here. Now, he's projected at 41 on PrizePicks, 41.12 on RotoGrinders. So at first glance, you're like, man, there's not a whole lot of edge here for us to take an over and under. It's pretty close, and you'd be right. These two sites are pretty online and in agreement that 41 is a solid projection for Donovan Mitchell. So let's dig into his game logs and just see how he's been performing lately. Alrighty, so with those loaded up, we jump back to 5 games ago against the Clippers, 55.3. Very good game there. Now this one was a good game as well, 36.8, but that would have fallen quite a bit short of that 41 fantasy point number if you're looking to take an over on Mitchell tonight. 42 would be just enough to get him past 41 for another over. 45.7, another over, and a 41.8 would also be an over. So he's not crushing the over of 41, but he is getting it done. In his last 5 games, he's gone over 4 out of 5 times. In fact, we can even include his 6th game here where he went over at 53.1. So very good success rate of going over 41 lately. He's been playing fantastic basketball. Don't see a previous game log to discuss of Jazz Pelicans, so we can move ahead and talk minutes. They got him projected to play 34 tonight. He's a combo guard, and the fact that the Pelicans are allowing over 51 fantasy points per game to combo guards is an eye-opener for me, and that's what really caught my attention about Donovan Mitchell here in this matchup. I think there's definitely some upside here. There's a case to be made for him going over his projection of 41, even though both sides kind of agree that 41 is an appropriate projection for him. 3 games and 4 nights for him, playing 33.6 minutes per game, not bad. 1.16 fantasy points per minute, and then his usage is at 31.78. So good numbers for Mitchell in this situation. Moving on down the line here, Eric Bledsoe. Eric Bledsoe's in actually a pretty good situation. Too bad he's not on the PrizePicks board tonight. That would have been a fun play. Zion Williamson projected at 43 on PrizePicks, 41.3 on RotoGrinders. This is not a good DVA situation for him. It's actually a negative DVA, but Zion's been playing pretty good basketball recently. Let's keep moving on down the line here. We got Rudy Gobert projected at 39 on PrizePicks, 38.87. So both sides kind of agreed. 38 to 39 seems like the way to go on Gobert. Not seeing a ton in terms of a good edge there. If anything, based on the DVA, I would probably lean toward the under, as Gobert will probably be locking horns with Steven Adams for most of the night. Speaking of Steven Adams, he's in a little bit of a negative DVA situation. He's not on the board, so that doesn't really matter. Lonzo Ball, not in a good DVA spot either. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much going to do it for this game in terms of guys that really stand out. But fantastic totals here on both sides of the ball. The only thing that worries me is the spread. I would have to put this one in like a yellow to orange range, as Utah's just been playing really, really good basketball lately. So, with that being said, we can move on to the next game where we've got the Brooklyn Nets versus the San Antonio Spurs, and this game is loaded with talent. We've got James Harden, we got DeMar DeRozan, we've got Kyrie Irving. If he, decides to play, I guess he's going to be okay. DeJounte Murray's been playing good basketball too. He was a guy I took the over on the other night, and he ended up hitting, so good job there for DeJounte Murray. So let's take a look at this game here on RotoGrinders and start breaking things down. San Antonio Spurs, the home team, 114.5, hosting the Brooklyn Nets. Brooklyn, 119.5, so you're talking 5-point spread here. Very good totals. Those totals are fantastic. They definitely eclipse that 230 or more point mark that I look for. And the spread, I would even give not quite a green to, but I'd call it like a yellow, green yellow, right on the borderline of being a fantastic spread where this game is going to stay close and competitive, at least on paper anyways. Now, if we look at some of the DVA numbers here, there are some big ones that are jumping off. We got Kyrie Irving. He's projected at 48 tonight on PrizePicks. They got him at 46.04 on RotoGrinders. And I'm sure that the questionable injury designation has something to do with that, with the lower projection. I think once he's cleared to play and he's good to go tonight, that you'll probably see that projection on Roto Grinders go up a little bit, but still 46 to 48 is looking like the range for him. Now let's dig into his recent game logs and see what Kyrie has been up to. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, Kevin Durant continues to be sidelined with a hamstring injury for this Nets team, so most of the workload has fallen on the shoulders of James Harden, Kyrie Irving. So we're going to take a look at the last 5 games for Kyrie. Now, his projection's 48 tonight, so he's went over 48 here in this one with 52.3. He missed this game, came back and went well under here at just 29.9, despite playing over 33 minutes. 47.8 puts him slightly under, 43.5 puts him under, and 51.5 puts him over. So in his last 5 games, he's got 2 games where he's went over 48 and 3 games where he's went under 48. So been a bit of a mixed bag for him. Hasn't been somebody that you feel like you've got a good read on, that you can particularly trust. Now tonight, he's expected to play 36 minutes. He's going to be projected for over 46 fantasy points, which would put him under the 48. Combo guards, though, versus the San Antonio Spurs team, they have done well. 57.58 fantasy points per game. Now, it just so happens that both Kyrie and James Harden fit or fall into that combo guard classification. So both of these guys are in very good DVA matchups here. The reason I'm talking Kyrie and not Harden is because his projection of 48, the difference between that and this average of 57.58 is greater. So I think that there's more upside for Kyrie Irving here than there is James Harden based on their projections. 2 games and 3 nights for Kyrie, playing 35 minutes per game, 1.27 fantasy points per minute, and a usage rating of over 29, creeping up to almost 30. Fantastic situation there for Kyrie. So liking the way that one's looking. Now, moving down the list here, here's another guy in a good plus DVA situation. DeJounte Murray, who's projected at 38. He's at 39.9 over on Roto Grinders, which puts him right there at 40. So you're talking about a pretty good over there of almost 2 points. Now, let's dig into the game logs real quick on Murray and see what he's been up to. 38, if I remember correctly, has been a number that Murray's been able to hit more often than not in recent games. So yes, indeed, if we go back to his 5th game here, just 12.8 against Golden State. Not a game to remember. 33.7, also a bad game, but he only played 24 minutes in that one, 26 in the game before that. So 2 bad games, low minute numbers, but then his minutes took off here, and so did his fantasy production. 55.4, 52.8, and 47.7. So in 3 straight games, he's absolutely destroyed tonight's projection of 38. It's looking lovely here. So that's 3 overs in his last 5, 2 unders. Now, if we look at the minutes tonight, he's expected to play 34, which is a good sign already. So DeJounte Murray over 30 minutes is looking good. Now, this DVA situation is a +1 for him. He's projected for 38 on PrizePicks. The Nets are allowing over 43 fantasy points per game to combo guards. So I like the way that this one is setting up for Murray. 2 games and 3 nights, 1.16 fantasy point per minute, and his usage rating is almost at 24. So looking pretty good here for DeJounte Murray. Let's just skim through the rest of them and see if there's anybody else jumping off the page. Jakob Poeltl, I think that's how you say his name, Pirtle, something like that. I don't know. Anyway, he's projected at 27 over on PrizePicks, and on Roto Grinders, he's at 27.85. So maybe a little bit of upside there for him. DeMar DeRozan, not in a very good DVA situation tonight. Probably not a guy that I'm looking to take an over on. If anything, maybe the under on his projection of 40 is the way to go. And yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for this game. Not a ton more that I like here, but great totals. Spread's pretty good too. Doesn't look like it's going to be a major blowout, at least not right away. So I think, makes a lot of sense to target this game from a fantasy perspective. So let's move on down the board here on PrizePicks. And next game we've got is the Cleveland Cavaliers playing bad basketball. Not a very good team. But then again, neither is the Houston Rockets. Now you notice John Wall is not on the board. I think they're looking to rest him, which means Victor Oladipo is going to be the lead dog for this Houston Rockets franchise. For Cleveland, you've got Colin Sexton, Darius Garland, and Jared Allen. For Houston, you've got Jayshawn Tate, Victor Oladipo, and Eric Gordon. So let's turn this game on here and take a look at the totals first and foremost. We got Houston as the home favorites, 109.75. Cleveland on the road, 107.25. You're talking about 2.5 points in terms of spread. So, yeah, the totals aren't very heavy. They aren't very exciting, I guess we could say. But the spread looks pretty good here in terms of it staying a close competitive game, which is good because if you target any of the guys on the board tonight, you're going to want them to be out on the floor for 4 quarters of basketball. So we're going to start things off at the top of the list here. Colin Sexton and Darius Garland, both classified as combo guards, both in very good spots in terms of DVA. The Houston Rockets allow over 55 fantasy points per game to combo guards. So I think there's a pretty good chance that one of these two is going to go off tonight. Now, out of the two, Colin Sexton's got the higher fantasy points per minute at 0.93. Slightly more than this 0.85 of Garland, and he's got the higher usage rating at 27.17, putting him a few points above Darius Garland as well. So their projections on PrizePicks, you got Sexton at 35, Garland at 30. So looking at those versus Roto Grinders here, Garland's at 32, so they like the over on Garland. I think that makes some sense. And then Colin Sexton's at 34.28, putting him slightly under versus PrizePicks. So I like the way that this is setting up. Probably a little bit more for Garland, even though his fantasy points per minute and usage aren't quite as good. Garland's been playing pretty decent basketball lately. Let's talk about him instead of Sexton real quick. Again, as I mentioned, projected for 30 on PrizePicks. If we go back to his 5th game in his game log here, 28.7 puts him under his 30. 43.6, plenty of room there to go over. 32.4, over. 22.8 puts him under. And then a 42.9 puts him well over 30 as well. So in his last 5 games, guys, he has went over in 3 out of 5. So fantastic start there for Darius Garland as far as the way that this one's setting up. Now, they did just play Houston back on February 24th, which was, a few days ago, about a week ago now. So in that game, he played over 35 minutes, finished with just 22.8 fantasy points. So maybe a little bit of a different cast of characters for this Houston Rockets team. I think John Wall was probably in for that, and Victor Oladipo was out. Now you got Oladipo in, John Wall out. Maybe it makes a difference, maybe not, but just something to kind of keep in mind there. So liking the way this one's setting up for both Garland and Sexton. One of those guys is probably bound to go over, and so far it looks like Darius Garland is probably the one. Now, Victor Oladipo is also in an interesting spot here. He is projected for 43 on PrizePicks. They like him to go under on Roto Grinders, but if you look at the DVA here of 52.32, that's much higher than his projection of 43 on PrizePicks. So I'd say that there is a bit of a ceiling here for Victor Oladipo to hit. So good chance here that he can hit over 43 fantasy points. But let's look at his game log because they've been spotty and ugly and up and down and patchy too. Alrighty, so as those continue to load, you can see that Victor Oladipo has missed a bunch of games in his last dozen or so. He's missed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games. So he's just been in and out of the lineup, dealing with injuries, and his production has been up and down. But that seems to kind of be the case with Victor Oladipo in the last couple of years. Injuries, inconsistencies in terms of production when he is out on the court. So as a former Magic fan, I love this guy. I never wanted us to trade him. We chose Evan Fournier over him for the most part. And, I really wish we had Oladipo back. But anyway, looking at his last 5 games, it's ugly. So he went under here at 25.7, but then he jumps up to 40, which would still be under based on today's projection of 43. Misses a game, comes back, just drops 15.8 fantasy points in 20 minutes of action. Then he goes on to miss 4 games in a row, 36.7 and then 45. So he's only really went over in his last 5 games that he's played in just one of them. So 1 over, 4 unders. It's been hard to trust Victor Oladipo. Now this game against Cleveland, he did play almost 32 minutes, ended up with 36.7 fantasy points. So not a good performance in that one. And I think him and John Wall were sharing the court. So yeah, a bit more of an upside here for Victor Oladipo if John Wall is out. But I've already talked about the DVA situation, plus DVA for sure. Back-to-back 3 games in 4 nights for Oladipo, but not really worried about fatigue here because he has missed so many games. I think that he should be pretty well rested. He's playing 32.2 minutes per game, 1.11 fantasy points per minute, and a 28.44 usage rating. So Victor Oladipo, not a guy that I really love or trust here. If anything, I'd probably be clicking the under, and I agree with Roto Grinders that he probably will fall short on this 43, despite the terrific DVA situation for him. So moving along here, not Dwayne Wade, but Dean Wade. Almost got me there. Looking down the line, Jared Allen is at 43 on PrizePicks. He's at 41.98. Call it 42 on Roto Grinders, so they like the under. This is a situation where I think the last time he faced this Rockets team, he feasted on them. Yes, sir. He sure did. He dropped 61.6 fantasy points on this Houston Rockets team. Rockets, in case you haven't watched any Rockets games, they don't really have any good big guys. Christian Wood's been on the shelf for a while. They let DeMarcus Cousins go. So I think they're playing some like G League dude that got like called up or something. So Jared Allen could be in another spot to go over this 43 fantasy point number tonight. The DVA doesn't look sexy on paper, but hey, they just don't have anybody. Sometimes you just got to take these numbers and throw them out the window and say, hey, what makes sense? Jared Allen versus some no-name bum? Probably lean toward taking the over there. Yeah, nobody else really jumping out here, though. We can go ahead and move on. Just overall, my summary of this game, not a whole lot of points here from either side of this game. Spread is good, though. Should stay close and competitive. So with that being said, let's move to the next game. Now, last night, if you guys played some Charlotte Hornets overs, man, for the most part, a lot of those dudes hit. I know LaMelo Ball went over 40 fantasy points. Malik Monk had went over his projection of 21 from earlier in the day. Miles Bridges went over. About the only guy who didn't go over maybe was Terry Rozier, who was also in a good spot. But, you know, I guess not everybody can eat. Not everyone is able. All right, so if we take a look here at this game totals are looking fantastic for this one. Bit of a scare in terms of blowout here. Portland 119.25, Charlotte 113.25. Probably got to give this one a yellow moving into orange because there is a 6-point spread here. So yes, I love it in terms of team totals, but the spread is a little bit worrisome. I do question if these guys, these starters, these stars are going to play a full complement of minutes. So moving down the list here, Damian Lillard, he's projected at 56 over on PrizePicks. Big number for Dame, 52.8, so we can round that up to 53, and that would put him under by a couple of points, a few points according to Roto Grinders. DVA situation's pretty good though. Charlotte allowing over 48 fantasy points per game to guys like Damian Lillard. So let's just see if 56 has been a number he's been going over or under in his recent games, his last 5. Now, going back to February 17th, he did score 73.8, huge game, which would put him well over 56. And then the following game, he puts up 60, which puts him well over 56. So that's back-to-back overs. But then he goes under in 3 straight games. So 56 just seems super steep for Damian Lillard. Now his minutes, he's expected to play 37 minutes tonight. He is a combo guard. I mentioned the DVA being good, but not necessarily a positive or plus matchup for Damian Lillard. He should be well rested, playing 36 minutes per game. His fantasy points per minute, 1.32. So good fantasy points per minute numbers. And then his usage rating's at 33.45. So some of the best in terms of fantasy points per minute and usage in the NBA. So I'm probably leaning toward the under on Dame, but let's see if there's anybody else that's catching our eye today. Malik Monk, I mentioned he was a guy that we liked yesterday. He's projected at 22 today. He was at 21 yesterday, so they've got him at 20.16 over on Roto Grinders, but is in a very good DVA situation. He's a combo guard, and Portland has allowed over 47.5 fantasy points per game to combo guards. So both Monk and Terry Rozier in good spots, and I would even put LaMelo Ball in that category. I know they have him classified as a distributor, which means a pass-first point guard, a floor general type, but I think he fits more in that combo guard classification. So I disagree a little bit. LaMelo Ball also makes for an interesting play, but they've increased his projection up to 43. I liked him better at 40 in terms of like targeting the over here. So 43 is a bit steep, is a bit too rich for me. But I also don't feel good about taking the under, so I'm probably just going to fade the guy, to be honest with you, and not play him and not go after the over or the under on LaMelo Ball. But yeah, looking at the rest of these guys here, Gordon Hayward's not on the board. Don't need to really waste any time talking about him. PJ Washington could be in an interesting spot if like Hayward ends up being ruled out. Let's see how PJ did last night. Today he's projected at 28 on PrizePicks. See if he went over last night with some increased minutes with guys being out. Oh, yeah, wow. He did, and I guess I slept on that. But yeah, in his last 5 games, he's gone over his projection of 28 in 3 out of 5, so looking pretty good. Although some of these are very like polarizing. Like he went 66 last night, but went 10.2 just a few nights ago against Phoenix. So yeah, kind of a up and down here for Mr. PJ Washington, but if he plays 30 minutes like he's expected to, versatile forwards against Portland, Portland allowing over 35 fantasy points per game, so that puts him, a few points higher. Their average is higher than his projection of 28 tonight, so there's some room here for upside with PJ Washington for sure. It's a back-to-back for him, 3 games and 4 nights, playing over 29 minutes per game, 1 fantasy point per minute average, and then his usage is at 19.4, so could be a situation where PJ Washington steps his game up if Gordon Hayward doesn't end up playing, and who's the other guy? Devontae Graham ends up sitting out again like he's expected to. But Gary Trent possibly in a plus situation here. Shooting wings against Charlotte, they've allowed 30.5 fantasy points per game to shooting wings. So Gary Trent in a pretty good situation there. And really there's not a whole lot of other guys here that are jumping off the page to me. So I think we're going to wrap the video up with that one. You guys let me know, is there anybody in today's video that you're liking the over on or the under on? Drop a comment below and tell me their name and who it is and why. I love to hear your feedback. I love to get into your mind and see what your ideas are for tonight's NBA slate. So guys, just remember to continue to play lighter, I think, than usual. A lot of volatility in the NBA tonight, and recently in this last week, it's been just a wreck. So I think a lot of guys have their focus on the All-Star break. They're ready to get a little bit of rest and some vacation. They've been playing a lot of minutes, a lot of games here in the first half of the NBA season. So just be careful, flex more, play less power plays, play more flex plays, and just go a little bit lighter than usual and take care of your bankroll while things are rough. That's going to do it for today's video. My name is CJ. Thanks for tuning in to Out of Bounds DFS. I wish you all good luck tonight. And until the next one, guys, let's win some money tonight. Peace.